Hey, everybody, here's this Agile thing. That is Mike Markey.
And that is Matt Bean.
Hey, everybody. So today we've decided to talk about psychological safety.
No way. No, I think you're wrong.
I need an adult. And if you'll permit me, I will just go through a really quick introduction of I figure maybe this could be a regular part of the show. I've made some notes.
Oh.
And I can just sort of level set, just sort of prepare the way. So just sort of establish what we're talking about, and then we can go into the crazy.
Fair.
Whatever. Yeah.
Go for
crazy,
it.
Crazy.
Do your thing.
So the person who's, I think, maybe most associated with this concept is Amy Edmondson.
Mm-hmm.
She's been doing research on this since, I guess, the 90s.
Wow.
And I think she was involved with a Google Project Aristotle. There's a lot of research, actually, that I found when I looked at her book. It's called The Fearless Organization, which is sort of maybe considered the definitive treatment of this stuff. But the reason I thought it was interesting is that, oh, God. So you and I spent a lot of time with a lot of organizations, right? Trying to get them to create software better and faster and higher quality and all that stuff. And there's a lot of processes and tools and specifics and behaviors and patterns and stuff. But it always struck me that kind of really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get people to think together, right? To put whatever drama aside and be able to achieve higher levels of clarity in their consciousness and back and forth in terms of the flow of ideas. And so that's kind of, I think, at the heart, whatever structure, process that you put around this thing, at the heart of it, until AI replaces us all, the job is really to get human brains, human souls to connect and to bring greater clarity to problem solving. And psychological safety is apparently one of the greatest ways. The lack of psychological safety is one of the greatest ways to prevent that. So the way that Amy defines it, it's a psychological.
If you can call her that.
If I can.
Yeah.
If I can. It's a belief that you will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, basically. Mm-hmm. Questions or concerns or mistakes. That it's safe to do interpersonal risk-taking. And, you can't afford to have a culture of fear because fear inhibits learning and cooperation, right? There's a couple of things that psychological safety is not, right? It's not about being nice, right? Or providing unconditional praise. It's not an attribute of your personality, right? In fact, it's kind of related to trust, right? But it's not trust, because trust is like an individual thing. Psychological safety is more of a group phenomenon, right? Do people feel safe in groups to be open? And it's not about lowering performance standards, right? You can still have high performance standards, high, outcomes, right? It's really just about, can I say this without bearing some sort of punishment or negative sanction? And it's not a perk, right? It's really necessary for performing in a volatile, uncertain world.
I'm just imagining the corporate meeting in which management gets up and says, we've decided to implement psychological safety in 2023.
Do it now.
Yeah. So start being safe.
Mm-hmm.
Let the safety commence.
Right. The meeting shall continue until the safety materializes, or whatever that is.
Beest thou safe.
And you can see why, on an individual basis, why people would be reluctant to do this, right? Because if you look at the sort of the calculation every person makes, right? If I speak up now, right, I'm bearing the risk of doing this, right? Like something could happen to me. Right, and that happens now, right here in this meeting. Well, whereas if I speak up, right, there's might be a greater benefit to the organization as a whole, but that's later. And so I think it helps explain how people get stuck in this sort of, without the leadership going first and saying, we actually are going to do this. You can't expect people to initiate this at the individual contributor level. Mike, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No,
I made you unsafe.
It's all right. I didn't feel attacked in any way.
Very good. Fine. That's for later.
But I did lose my train of thought. So I was going to follow that up, or I was going to add to that, I guess. So I think even if an organization reaches a point where they recognize that having a little bit of safety would be desirable, it's it's like they get in their own way sometimes. They and the thing that's getting in their way is their own past. And I kind of liken it to PTSD, that they've had they have misbehaved in the past, where in terms of taking feedback from people or giving feedback to people, and because of that, there's battle scars. There's something holding people back from just trusting and doing that. And here we come along and say, hey, we want you guys to be transparent. We want open and honest communication. We want you guys to feel comfortable in your small group environment to come together and say, hey, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm stuck right now and I could use a hand.
Yeah.
And to know that these people around you have your back and they are your friends and they are your those are your colleagues, those are your allies, and you should be able to count on them unconditionally. And then somewhere in the back of your mind, or their mind, they're going, yeah. Easy for you to say, but that's not the way we do things around here.
Yeah. It doesn't match my experience.
Yeah. And so you can get, we could probably even illustrate this with real life alleged events. A conversation based on a true story, if maybe not.
Well, you and I see patterns a lot, right? We go to a lot of different places. We have a lot of conversations with people. It could be any one particular place or just maybe a composite of multiple places. But it's definitely, what you're talking about is a reflection of the real world in some real sense.
Yes, reflection of a real world. A situation where a team was experiencing a problem. In this case, the problem they were experiencing is they were having trouble promoting code into a higher environment so that it could go on for validation, right? It couldn't be tested. And so they couldn't get the test done until it was in that higher environment. And they were experiencing issues when they would put it up there. Or maybe they recognized that there was an issue when they put it up there, but they didn't know what they could do about it or how to do anything about it. And so they attempted to go on gamely without solving the issue for an extended period of time.
They did not sharpen the saw.
So a number of weeks passed in which no code was promoted through this environment. And if one were to, and after a period of time, it became apparent that something was wrong. People suddenly became aware of it, and they started digging into it, trying to get to the bottom of what had transpired. Why don't we know that this happened? How did that not get reported? And we even looked back, and we dug through any of the reports of the daily scrums and didn't see any message.
The reports of the daily
scrums.
scrums.
We talked to the scrum master and said, have you heard about this? Right.
Sure. Okay.
So you would think, as a developer, if I'm having an issue that I can't solve myself, I'm going to turn to my scrum master and say, hey, that part of the day where we talk about impediments, I think I've got one.
I would expect the team to have that discussion. Absolutely. Yeah.
At the very least, if not directing that to the scrum master, to direct that to the other members of the team, saying, I'm having some trouble figuring this out. Can some of you help, or what can we do about that? So saw no indication that had happened. We went through some planning sessions. There was no indication that any of that was out floating around. We went into another sprint. No mention made. We had a scrum of scrums. No mention made. And then all of a sudden, this is like this big hot issue. And let me make sure let me just say this back to you just so I make sure I understand. Yeah. So they had a impediment in their deployment process, right? So it sounds like they were lacking some automation to get stuff to higher level, to higher environments. Anyway, an issue with the code wasn't flowing, and they were able to get through. Was it a
a whole quarterly planning, a PI planning event
Yeah, they actually made it through a PI
with a
planning
known
event,
impediment,
Yes.
and they didn't bring it up.
and it never came up.
Okay, so that is a hard red flag you have to flag. Why wouldn't they bring that up?
Don't know. Why wouldn't they bring that up?
Why
That's the
wouldn't
question
they?
that's vexing me. At the time, that was the question that vexed me. And I would say, so I started asking questions like, where would you expect the knowledge of this to have flowed? Like, what do you, because I would be, I was talking with some of the managers, and the managers were saying, well, we're going to need to get to the bottom of this. We're going to, and the language they were using led me to think that this was, in their mind, going to be a cracking skulls moment.
Yeah, the bottom of this could be some aspect of the system, or the
Yeah.
bottom of this could be a person who's crying in a conference room,
Yeah.
right? There's two different ways you could go about it.
Right. So we don't know if what we're dealing with here is a psychological safety issue, although one could suspect that in an environment in which, upon learning of it, the first reaction was to say, I think I need to crack some skulls, might be an indication
Yes.
that there's a reason for a lack of psychological safety and a reason why people are reluctant to just jump in and say, well, yes, I'm going to throw myself on the mercy of the court.
Yeah, no, if there's anything I can say in a meeting or at work that will result in my skull getting cracked, I am definitely going to be careful about what I share.
Yeah.
That seems pretty clear.
So,
Yeah.
and so somewhat true story, names changed to protect the innocent, but or the guilty, as the case may be. But, trying to, I remember it was really difficult for us to try to work our way around that, because we had to stay as the coaches, we had to stay from a dispassionate place. We had to say things like, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Right? Not, hey, you are being a problem in this, or you are, we couldn't get anywhere with that. So we're trying to establish some level of psychological safety in our communication with people so that
Totally.
we can at least get to a meaningful outcome and then try and drive them toward a more meaningful outcome. And there was definitely a challenge there. That kind of tried taking it to the basics of what interaction would you have hoped happened,
Right.
right? And then let's talk about why it didn't go that route.
Yes.
What could we do to ensure that in the future it could go that way? Like, what's the barrier? What's the barrier to keeping it from having gone that way? Is it a lack of education? Is it a lack of trust? Is it a fear of repercussion? And, it's not a conversation you're going to solve. You're not going to solve that by talking to a single person.
Right.
Right? It's a systemic issue. It's affecting more than one group. It's affecting more than one
Yeah.
group. It's just
It's like the culture.
yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a couple different. There's, on the one hand, there's the retro around how did the system get to this state,
Yeah.
and on the other hand is what is the. It seems like maybe a separate conversation, because when you're talking about psychological safety, to me it seems like it's probably a conversation that starts with leadership, right? Because leaders have to go first. They're the ones who set the culture. Even if we don't believe them, right, that we're now going to be psychologically safe, they at least have to make the initial effort, because they are the ones with the world power to change the whole culture and the nature of the organization. So, yeah, on the one hand, there's a retro about how the system got to that place, but then on the other hand, what can you do as a leader to grow the whole idea of psychological safety? I mean, she's got this, what she calls a leader's toolkit in her book, The Fearless Organization, and she basically talks about, setting the stage, inviting participation, and then responding productively. It sounds like responding productively was the part of it that you were ensconced in there. But like from a high level, what she's suggesting is that leaders need to set expectations about how stuff is going to go when we succeed and when we fail, right? What's the purpose of this? Why are we doing this in the first place? And how to think about what failure looks like or success. But But then also, to me, I think that the part that might be the most difficult, or what I've seen lacking the most, is the whole inviting participation. That's the second part of it, where she says, you have to have humility. You have to acknowledge the gaps in yourself as a leader, right? Which gives other people the courage to understand that that's okay and they can do it too. Practice asking good questions and modeling the whole listening thing, which is an underused skill, I think. Listening really intently. Create the structures and process, so there's places to have these conversations like you were talking about. How do you get all the way through PI planning and scrumless scrums and all these places where nominally the agenda is to talk about stuff that's broken, but we never talk about broken stuff. Like, that's clearly an opportunity for leaders to step in and be like, here's the intent of this meeting, and here's the behavior that I want to model for you to show you how to do it safely and demonstrate that nobody is gonna victimize you for being open.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea of destigmatizing the failure, right? The whole place is full of human. Every employee here is a human, which means, we're all going to make mistakes. And here's what happens when we make mistakes.
Yeah. And it's understanding the environment in which you're trying to give feedback or help people out. I had a situation where an environment that was owned by an individual, there were teams attempting to use that environment to promote a build or do something along those lines. And they started getting a bunch of errors in the build procedures. So their first thought was, okay,
every single one of them's fired.
What did we do wrong? Right. So they're going back and they're trying to dig through their code. And then they managed to figure out that somebody had upgraded one of the libraries on the environment. Just hey, we upgraded to a new version.
Didn't tell anybody.
And a bunch of their API calls were not matched up anymore. And so they recognized the fact, oh, this version has been updated. Now all our calls don't match. So their first reaction was, now we have to recode everything to use that new thing, and just quietly slink off into the corner to go do that, rather than questioning why the upgrade had been allowed in the first place, because clearly that wasn't a backwards compatible change.
And nobody else knew about it.
Right, and nobody knew about it, but they wouldn't question it. And so I'm like, why would no one feel comfortable questioning that? And was it, and I never did get an answer to that question, but I suspected at the time that it had more to do with the individual who ran that environment, that any attempt to question what was going on there in the past had been met with a negative response. So
100%. Yeah. If you think about what are the potential answers to that question, I don't think there's that many of them, right? Like, maybe the person just really doesn't like to talk to people or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I think the preponderance of the evidence, at least in my experience, is that bad stuff happens when they. Now, I should say there's another take on this that I think is super interesting. It's from, I think Ryan Ripley was the one who mentioned this. Psychological safety is not therapy, right? It's not connected to any sort of psychology or psychological services. This is, I think it was Ryan on Agile for Humans who mentioned that he must have seen somebody who was using the term of psychological safety as a way to act like a psychologist while in the role of Agile coach, which I've never seen, and it's not how the term struck me. But just to be clear, right?
You're not a doctor?
I'm not a doctor.
You don't play one on TV?
I don't play one anywhere, and I'm not, especially not in the workplace. I'm not board certified. This is psychological safety has nothing to do with and is completely separate from the idea of providing individual counseling or group counseling to people as a way to get to their issues from a mental health point. It's nothing to do with mental health, right? It is just, hey, what from a cause and effect point of view in terms of communication patterns, what happens when bad stuff arises, right? And the patterns within the organization. It is not therapy. It's nothing like that. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I don't think that would necessarily work.
No, it would be unethical and impractical and problematic and bad idea overall.
Fair. Definitely
Fair.
fair. So, like, is there something? I mean, you were reading Amy's book. Is there something that we can do to help promote psychological safety in a? I mean, it's one thing to build up an organization in the spirit of free expression and without repercussions. It's another
Yeah.
thing to take one and try to evolve to it. I would think.
Yeah.
Was there anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I didn't read the book in depth, but I think I think in a couple of places she said, so on an individual level, what you can do is you can model effective behavior, right? So you can start by asking quite sincere questions that you really want to know the answer to about another person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what are you working on? How are you feeling about that? What are the issues you're having? Just sort of model the idea and the sort of the vibe that this is a person. I care about the person. I actually want to get to the bottom of it. I'm not being a judgmental person in this case, or I'm not providing a negative sanction in terms of just the communication itself. I think definitely to really have any help with on the organizational level, I think, like I said before, you'll need to. I would recommend starting this with the leaders, and she makes that point several
Mm-hmm.
times. But there's a way. Maybe there's this a way to think about it. If you go to a psychologically safe organization, right, and you just observe the people and what they're doing, there's a way that they interact with each other, right? I mean, they're respectful. They listen. They ask questions that they really want to know the answer to, as opposed to leading questions or like trying to play a rhetorical game,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just be an above board, respectful person. On an individual level, I think that could at least clear the way for other people thinking, well, that's maybe one of the ways I could behave here as we go through a cultural transition.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I think starting with leadership is probably a definite way to go. I think working with Scrum Masters to help foster that within the teams
Great
is
point.
probably a super smart way to start, right? Because that's almost the smallest unit of measure. I mean, we definitely need that trust aspect to be
That should
strongly developed.
that should have been my answer. That's a much better answer.
Trust, openness.
Yeah.
What are those? There's a whole acronym of things.
Trust, openness, toast. You talking about
Courage.
toast?
I think there's courage. was
Toast.
one of them.
I don't know. I've never heard
There's
of
the
this.
Scrum values. The Scrum values.
Oh yeah, Scrum has values.
Courage, openness.
Determination, riboflavin,
Uh,
manganese. I don't remember what they are.
I forget what they
Yeah.
are.
Every framework has its own values.
They do. And do you ever disagree with those values? Have you ever run into any you disagree with?
No, but I've run into some where it was not. How should I put this? There were periods where I was like, well, these values are helpful, but there are other ones that would be helpful as well, and they're not in this framework that we happen to be using.
I see.
So it's important to note that the specific values of the framework that you're using might not be comprehensive. You might need some other stuff. And I think any practitioner of Scrum would tell you that, like, this is a framework. It's not complete, right? You need to apply your particular context to it. So
Yeah,
there might
instantly.
be other things you value.
Scrum values: courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness.
Focus is the one I was thinking of.
So you said commitment. You were going with determination at one point.
Yeah.
I think you really meant commitment.
I think I did.
Perhaps.
I think I did mean that.
Yeah,
If
but
I'd
you were
been
in
able
the-
to
you were in-
focus,
you were in the ballpark.
I was.
Yeah.
Yes, but there's no close in Scrum or horseshoes.
But in hand grenades, on the other hand, definitely.
So,
close.
I feel like we have drained this topic of psychological safety. Anything else to talk about, Mike Markey, before we close?
No, nothing that we really need to dig
Okay.
deeper into at this time.
Fantastic. So in the upcoming shows, we'll be talking about things like flow metrics for Scrum teams, maybe.
Oh, that sounds like that would be exciting.
It does sound exciting, doesn't
I
it?
think
I
there's
can feel the
definitely some-
excitement.
I think there's some depth to that topic that we could plumb
Maybe that tame flow thing from that guy Steve Tendon. That's interesting.
That one I'm familiar with. I think I have some prep work to do.
I'll create a little digest and we'll go over it. All right. Well, I think that's it. That was this Agile thing. Thank you for joining. That's Mike Markey, right?
That's Matt Bean.
All right.
And
Very good.
together, we are the Agile here things people.
Yes. This Agile thing that was here.